Hello, I'm Amina Ahmed and welcome. Today, I'm really delighted to be speaking with my guest. He's Arend van Kampen, and I'm going to tell you more about Arend in a moment. We're going to touch on a range of his specialist subjects. Very, very exciting work. He uses the laws that govern physics around information, and he applies that to everyday life in terms of societies, in terms of organizations, in terms of individual behaviors. And that tips into ethics, and we're going to obviously touch on the things that are happening in the world today, and specifically about how when these governance of information is applied poorly or wrongly, how that is doomed to failure. So Arend has particularly come up with a system called Realiteiteit, which is about how to put laws within harmony, with the main aim to try and stop suffering of people in the world and to simplify the complexities of governing laws of physics and nature. So all of that sounds incredibly complex and holistic, and it is. And Arend, self-confessed as a child, has always been a philosopher and free thinker, starting off watching the Kung Fu movies, I should imagine, in the 70s, and listening to Master Po. Later went on to become a successful businessman, entrepreneur, has worked in the oil and gas operations at all different oil and gas industries all over the world at different levels, at CEO level as well. And later went on to study business ethics and social responsibility in the context of health, safety and environment. Arend's created a think tank called Sustenance for All, which he'll talk about in the course of this conversation. And as I said before, he's very much about sustainable, non-harmful governance system to what he calls to replace non-functional democracies. And all of that thinking has been put into organizations such as globalethics.net in Geneva, and Arend also teaches his own online courses in cyber ethics. So having said all that, Arend, we've framed your work and life to some extent, although I know we're going to unpack a lot more. It's a lot more illustrious. So welcome today to this podcast dialogue.
Well, I'm impressed with all the things you to tell the audience about me. Thank you very much for having me. So hopefully I can explain the rather complex things maybe in a more simple way. I'll try to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really key because, I think when we first spoke, I explained to you that my school in physics was really poor, if non-existent. And so it's really from a lifelong learning perspective that I've been interested in physics and metaphysics and been self-taught in that respect. And I think some of our viewers will be in the same situation. So to be able to package that in layman's terms is really critical, and I know that you have a real skill to do that. So let's kick off with that then. You've written a paper and produced videos on how information is physical. So could you explain more about what you mean by that?
Yes, information is physical. It is actually an expression by Rolf Landauer of IBM in the 70s, that he understood that that reality consists not only of matter and energy, but also of information. So that means that everything we see, part of it is always information that cannot be disconnected from the reality of matter and energy. So information then becomes a physical reality. We are, in fact, part information.
Okay, so it's an entity in itself, you're saying?
Yes.
Contained within matter.
Yeah. So everything that you can see that we observe is consists of not only about energy and matter, but also of information. So we are also information carriers. Everything you see, a book, a house, a mountain, a tree, is an information carrier and also a messenger of information. So you have to see it like that. So therefore, everything we physically experience consists of information as well.
I really like that. I mean, I'm spiritual by nature and a practicing Buddhist, and that really fits with my cosmology or my view, which is that everything is connected, everything's interconnected. But you're taking it further, and you're talking about whatever the life form is, animate or inanimate, that we're all receivers and transmitters of this information. I think that's what you're saying.
Exactly. So we create our own reality by using information. You have to look at it like that. And of course, to prove or to demonstrate that it's like this, and not going into too much spirituality anymore, because spirituality is often regarded as nonsense. Therefore, I try to build the link between physics, so the laws of physics, and the expression, how reality expresses itself. So reality, our world, you and me, we are real. We are here, right? We observe them, not only by our minds, but we also exist. And the existence is partly made of information.
Okay. Interesting you're saying about the role of spirituality having dwindled in the modern day. And that's such a shame, because some of the conclusions that you draw from your work actually involves things about consciousness and conscience, which is very much about a philosophical base of how we live. And very often that's accessed through faith or spirituality or religion. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah. Okay, there's of course consciousness. Now, consciousness now being researched by many physicists is also part of information, is the fabric of our reality as well. So consciousness is also a physical, natural reality. It's not only within our brain, but it's like a collective awareness of information. So it's like a source of information is this collective physical reality of consciousness. This is beautiful, I think. So we tap under a collective consciousness as well. When you think about me, for example, I think about you right away at that time. There's non-local connections there. There's no space and time left anyway. So that's possible. When you pick up the phone, who it is sometimes, right? It's all to do with this collective, interconnected, interdependent consciousness we all can tap from, we all can learn from, we can all use for communication. Now, conscience, of course, is our inner voice, who tells us, reminds us how we ought to behave in order to survive. Conscience is a survival mechanism. We know when we do things badly or we do the wrong things. Our conscience reminds us to say, hey, better not to do it. When you do it anyway, you create a physical reality called remorse. Remorse then starts to eat you from within. And then because of that, you change your behavior, because to admit to remorse, is like ignoring your own inner voice. And then you ignore your inner voice, then you move into this area, and that usually ends up in stress. Stress then has to be relinquished by other behaviors again. So it's like a cycle.
Like a negative feedback.
Right, it's a cycle.
Feedback loop.
You can't really go on, like a feedback loop. You can't really get out unless you admit that you were wrong, and then you can say, okay, I can ease my conscience. Of course, by using, for example, the collective consciousness, because you can see that you did the wrong things, and then you can correct it by information.
Really interesting, because clearly things like consciousness or conscience, they're intangible, they're colorless, and yet they're very physical and very real. And you're saying that that's made real or manifest through information. I like how you describe this almost, well, it's not almost, it's definitely a negative feedback loop that comes from when we're not aligned to our conscience, so we ignore our intuition, or we ignore our higher morality self, so to speak, that we get into this negative feedback loop. And can you see that playing out in society today? Because I mean, we talk about cognitive dissonance, that seems to be particularly rife at the moment. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about that?
First things first, I'd like to explain to the audience that we have positive and negative feedback, right? That's what we talk about all the time. But negative feedback is not that it is negative in its own sense. Negative feedback meaning, actually, and this is the science of cybernetics, it means corrective information by which you can correct something going the wrong way. So negative feedback is not bad, it is good. Positive feedback is actually bad, because when you allow too much positive feedback, without any corrections by negative feedback, you're going in the wrong direction. This is how it works. So,
okay, so does that kind of, tip into a non-duality then, things being neither good nor bad, or am I talking against with another system here?
No, duality is a little bit different, I think, than positive and negative feedback. Duality, two sides of things. Of course, they have always two sides of things. We have interpretation either from this way or that way. But when we understand information feedback as a balancing system, we have to use both to stay in balance. For example, we go with a ship to another port. We sail from here to there. And the information we collect during our voyage, for example, wind, tide, depth of the water, is all feedback during our voyage towards that port, right? So if we ignore the negative feedback, for example, there's a storm coming, we won't reach our port. So negative feedback is a correcting power to reach our destination. When we do positive feedback alone, we say, okay, we go faster, faster with the ship without correcting for depth or for height, we won't reach that destination either. So you see, this is how cybernetics, the science of governance and control feedback works.
Okay, so talking about corrective feedback, I've just literally switched off my participants list on there, so I just realised that was on the screen. I hope that's not distracted any of our viewers. So there's an element of correctiveness in what I've just done. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this, because not only do you talk about all the elements that help us, to steer in particular directions using energy, matter, and information, but you're also talking about, going in the right direction. And I know that from a previous conversation, you've talked about some of the things that take us away, from this kind of sustaining reality. So, for example, the consequences of lying in particular, and how it impacts on physics. In your paper, you specifically talk about that in terms of entropy. So, again, could you just explain more to the viewer about those things?
Yes, well, what I found by researching ethics and the right thing to do, so not to lie, tell the truth, to use the truth, and to accept reality as it is, as it comes to you. We have this idea of ethics and lying. Of course, when you lie, or you are then, of course, ignoring information you should have or you ought to have used. This is how it is. We ought to have things. the behavior of doing the right thing, how you ought to behave, is called deontology. Deontology means that you do the right thing because you ought to do it. But when you start lying, you start to ignore information you should have used. That information, again, then is shortened. You have less information to deal with. Now, then we look at the laws of physics. And one of the physical laws we have is that information deficit is per definition disorder, or we call entropy. So when you start to ignore information you should and you ought to have used to correct your ways, for example, you always end up in disorder, entropy, and then you cannot control that system any longer. This is a law of physics. So I research this further and further, not only from the realm of physics alone, but in real life. Now, I tried it out many times, and I teach and train people is that we need a maximum of information and to ask the much possible questions in order to stay sustainable. So sustenance for all, so livelihoods for all are dependent on the use of all relevant information. The moment you ignore, suppress, or even create fake news, you end up in disorder, entropy, and no longer control can be ascertained.
So that's very, very interesting, because I was going to go on to that more, because we live in a society of deceit. By its very nature, any kind of top-down control needs to limit the amount of access people have to information and to think critically. And it seems that we're living in a society where there's this, I call it virtue signaling, which is that we're doing the right thing for the social good. So therefore, we're good citizens in that respect. But actually, that's based on a dearth of information or a dearth of critical thinking, a dearth for taking responsibility for one's own actions. You're saying that is doomed to failure because it's actually hindering the flow of information and the flow of self-sustaining organizations.
Correct. How we have built our society, and not just now, but I looked in Civilization, the book by Roger Osborne, 6,000 years ago. We see every time the same causality, one causality that causes entropy all over through all the years of civilizations. Every time information was suppressed. Information was suppressed by force. The force led to more entropy, more disorder, until such civilizations collapsed, until those organizations, ideologies imploded. So using these findings that demonstrate that everything that information deficit or shortage of information causes disorder, we cannot control things, is very much applicable down to today. We now build a society enforced upon us, and enforced due and deliberately suppressing contradictive or negative feedback to correct it. The negative feedback must be allowed in order to sustain that system. So therefore, I'm very scared, almost, scary for me to find these things, because I can now see and predict that what we are doing now will not be sustained, cannot be sustained ever, because it defies the laws of physics. It defies the laws of how nature works. So this leads to this perception problem, how we see the world at the moment.
Okay, so that's interesting in some ways. I and some of the viewers might see that as a good thing, that it can't sustain itself, that it's destined to implode, that any top-down or globalist kind of agenda that's imposing an autocratic kind of worldview, by its very nature will not sustain itself. So therefore, that's a welcome thing that it won't sustain itself. However, the amount of suffering that's going to unleash is where the real issue is, isn't it?
Yes.
And as I said in my introduction, that's something that you're really trying hard to stop, the unnecessary suffering.
Exactly. Yeah, the harmfulness, because the transition is always painful. Any transition is painful. So when we now observe that the system we are now trying to enforce upon the globe can't be achieved, is unattainable, which this theory demonstrates, we must be happy that it will not work, it will not sustain itself, because it can't escape the laws of physics. But we must be prepared to go through this painful, harmful transition time. And that's why I'm trying to reach as many people, by speaking, by writing the books and so on, to prepare them for that. And when the people come prepared, as they say, there's a saying, a wise man comes prepared, perhaps my research would help a little bit to mitigate that.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. That's really interesting. I think similarly, in setting up this Free Thinkers Hub, it's I'm really wanting a space for information to be shared, communication to be shared, without criticism, without fear of censorship, without judgment, so we can all collectively come to some positive transitions and ways of being in the world. So very similarly, and I think there are millions and millions of people around this globe right today who are aiming to do the same. I mean, there's the the awaken movement, so to speak, to really help people to wake up. That it's by living in a deceitful feedback loop is really not helpful, and that we need to change the trajectory of that, which leads us into ethics, really, because ethics and business politics is business and politics is a big area for you, in terms of the organizations you're looking to influence. Oh, you're sharing your screen here. So can you just talk more about those things in terms of laws of ethics? I know you do talk about cybernetics, and I'm not sure we've got time to really go into that in any depth, but you do train in ethics and cybernetics. But can you just talk more about things like vulnerability and risk and pros and cons of ethical behaviors in these arenas?
Yeah, so I didn't want to share the screen. I just wanted to put it on my other screen to tell you what the advantages is of being ethical, and the disadvantage of not being ethical we just discussed, of course. So what I learned in my my master's study in business ethics, it is like, when you are ethical, you can create moral capital. Moral capital is then being paid in a certain listing of things. For example, we can have a balanced prosperity, so health and safety for all. We have this idea of happiness in the firm or in the organization. Happiness means productivity and so on. We have a sustainable business and model, and also the reputation value will increase enormously when we do things. We have a profit growth through trustworthiness, for example. We can grow our profits through trustworthiness. When we, do unethical business and we try to squeeze every penny out of a customer, of course, that customer won't, buy from us anymore, of course. So we have become cost effective through moral ethics. And of course, we reduce our cost for compliance, for regulation, for law firms, to protect us, everything.
So it is an advantage we can calculate in real money compared to unethical or ethical behavior in organizations. It's also applicable for governments, of course, as well.
Interesting. So, I mean, you've written a book on Corona Crisis, Nature Strikes Back, and that's based on some of the work you did. So you're basing that on the unethical mineral mining in the Congo, which obviously has cause and effect and impact in terms of production, environment, governance, social cohesion, distribution, etc. And it's predicated on suffering because it's child slavery to mine those minerals, and it's all connected to our technology, our mobile phones, etc. So you're drawing those kind of conclusions. So could you tell the viewer more about some of the real, life examples of what you've just been describing as moral capital? Because the stuff that you describe in that book is immoral capital.
Yes. Well, I have the book here, and I thought I'd read something about it. So this is it's about a company that is they changed the CEO eventually, and the CEO goes sustainable, right? So he addresses his management team what to do, because they want him to be the CEO, but he says there's only one condition: we have to become sustainable. So he says, actually, it's kind of easy. We will abide to the guidelines as described by the OECD, due diligence guidance of responsible supply chain of minerals and conflict affected and high-risk areas, and will assist the UN towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We have an enormous break here. Think about the money we will save on health and safety claims, compliance teams, litigation, and those damned overpaid lawyers. At this moment, we have to finance an entire claims department that is dealing with all kinds of countries or NGOs, suing us for damages, pollution, the local labor laws we may or not may have been broken. So this is costing us millions, and think of all those girls and women who are systemically raped and mutilated. We could be the symbol of hope for those women. I saw how they were buried in the monastery of Africa after they were of no use, of no use anymore, discarded like vermin. So that is actually a scene of the book, from a CEO addressing to show the people in his office what's going on, and that, of course, hopefully to change their mindset of going sustainable and not being harmful any longer by becoming a moral capitalistic entity. So like that.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this is a big issue for a lot of organizations at different levels, especially corporates in terms of their ESG agenda. Yeah. And it seems to me that by seeming, it's almost like the thing about virtue signaling, by seeming to do the right thing, you can, kind of stay within what is seen as good governance. But you're unpacking that to a greater degree because, to really to create this moral capital takes more than just ticking boxes, doesn't it?
Yes, it's not just window dressing. We do it the right way. We follow the guidelines. We report sustainability reporting and so on. You have to go out there and look at what's going on and there physically do things. And again, we have the information to actually change those things to do, right? The information is there all the time. The information, as I say, in physics cannot be divorced from reality. So the information to do well is there. It is cheap. It is not expensive at all to do it, because people, their perception of that is going to affect their bottom line is false. Because as I just said before, we can gain a better reputation. We have the ability to gain more clientele. We sell more goods by being, a transparent non-harmful organization. So it is, for me, it's clear that ethics is information you can use, and if you do not use it, you become vulnerable. This is the rule.
Okay, so I mean, one of the things on my particular journey, because I spent a long time in a Buddhist organization, and we were very much on the lines of seeing large bodies like the UN as being laudable, as being places where ethics, fairness, and good governance takes place. However, the reality of that can be very different, as you know, in terms of these world organisations, whether it's the UN, World Health Organization, or global think tanks. Can be mired in scandal and corruption and deceit and disinformation. So what kind of views do you have in terms of taking governance from some of these things? Does the ethics of information stand alone in itself, or can it only be distributed through a vehicular form, such as an infrastructure organization, for example?
The question, ethics as in an organization such as the UN, of course, it's their image, but of course there are so many interests to be honored in these organizations. The interests of the member states, for example, come first. Right? So if Russia says no, or the US says no, they don't do that because of the good of their hearts, because they want to protect an interest they prioritize. And so if we want to change that organization to become ethical, then of course the law that I just explained, that information deficit means entropy, may be useful for them. I really hope that they are aware that whatever they do there, they will not be able to control it any longer because they defied that law. And this is why I created this law of physics. I thought about it as a law of physics. I hope it will be acknowledged less as such, to make these people aware, and they start to take account of that. So they say, hey, listen, we can't do this because we defy reality. And when we defy reality, the thing we cause is more entropy, more disorder, more unbalanced systems that we have. We cannot just say, okay, there's famine in Syria, we're gonna ship a lot of food there, without actually taking the causes away. For example, the immigration politics in Europe, all these people that are fled from war zones, we cannot not solve the cause first, rather than giving them shelter something. So we have to always go for the first cause principle, which is actually a message from philosophy by the school of Athens, and then Aristotle and Plato. They say, okay, the first task of the school of ethics is to seek knowledge of causes. So when we don't do that, we will never solve them. And we can only solve the cause by accepting that all information relevant to that cause must be used to stabilize that system again. That's all.
Very, very interesting. Because that whole law of cause and effect is inescapable, and there are many different ways of seeing it. You could see it as karmic in nature, so by not addressing the cause, then it's a bit like putting a sticking plaster on you when you have a fever. If you put the wrong, apply the wrong symptom, the wrong remedies to the symptoms, then it only exacerbates it sometimes. It certainly doesn't, deal with it.
Yeah.
I know that you want to really get to the influencing table of places like World Economic Forum and Davos in terms of this thinking. You know, I'm kind of wondering that, is there a particular equation? So you've got the equation that, you know, about sustainability being based on, not being based on information stagnation and entropy, which leads to entropy, but having it in the system so it can self-regulate, adjust, find root causes. But is there a kind of equation of where there's a tipping point? Because not everyone at the table is going to be of the same mind. So what in effect, when we're putting things out in the field in terms of being transmitters of information or receivers, where do you see that tipping point happening for sustainability?
You mean the tipping point towards entropy, or the tipping point towards balance, for example?
Towards balance, yes.
For balance, right. Now, well, okay, when we set a goal, that goal is not a goal in itself. It's not like an end point. A goal must be seen as something dynamic. Dynamic meaning that all the goals, ideology, political goals, they are, you know, imaginations really. They cannot be achieved unless at the moment that goal somewhere is achieved, it allows again correction by new feedback, by real-time information. I think that is the idea, that they say we're going to set a plan, a central plan. In 10 years' time, we have to be zero energy, zero CO2 energy, you know, producers, for example. But again, when the causality has not been changed, it will never be reached, of course, because central plans ever were reached, ever. From the Nazis, from everyone, all these central plans of making this 1,000-year Reich, you know, were dreams without any correcting feedback, and they cannot be achieved. So the tipping point would say there is no tipping point unless we are noticing it is going to be harmful. I think that the moment that is becoming harmful, something, we should correct it. So that is our reminder of the tipping point of, hey, we are in the right way, we can still sustain the ideas that we have for the long term. I see it like that. So it's always having to do with real-time information correction and dynamics.
Okay, so that's taking it into the physical plane of being either proactive or reactive, but based on you know, good information, good governance. My you know, question is almost about the buy-in, you know, the buying to the principles itself. How much buy-in do you need to really make something you know, manifest? You know, I think I shared with you earlier that the work of our Dawkins, which is talks about, you know, 15% of people, if they're very conscious of these things, can affect the rest, because the energy and information from that is resonating at a higher level. So I'm kind of going back to the physics almost here, you know, of where that, you know, where that point of balance can be achieved in your system.
Yes, so I agree on 15%. If you read the work by Dean Reddin about the you know, parapsychological influence by masses, by volume, by more people, of course we have then the ability to steer that momentum by a volumetric mind, really, you know, a collective mind that thinks the same thing. If that's possible. So, but that's again a little bit back. We will have to see if the systems we build are able to learn. This is actually the basic question. Is a system, a plan, able to learn and then become adaptive to the new situation, for example. This, I see, is not being thought about much in politics. They, in Brussels, they set a plan, climate change plan, and then that plan cannot be adjusted anymore by new information. Therefore, that plan will never be achieved. It cannot be, because it defies again the laws of physics. This is not how nature works. Nature works with communication, cooperation, the ability to communicate, and information. So if we keep that in mind, then we can redesign, let's say, sustainable systems design that I do, adjust everything we've built from now and repair the old stuff, not replace them or renew them. And then we can build this sustainable society that is non-harmful. So
yeah, that leads nicely onto, yeah, because you talk about democracies just can't be stable and just. I think that's how we first met. Was you responded to a post that I put on LinkedIn, and you said by their nature democracies are not a form of government that can be sustained. You believe that notocracies are the preferred model. So can you just explain to us what you mean by that?
Yes, well, as a think tank, I came up with this word noticracy. So it's based upon the Latin word notitia is information, and krasia is Greek, rule or governance. Again, when a democracy is a rule based on the largest group, for example, 51% of the voters say no and 49% say yes, we have to know who are those voters. Are they people of interest? Are they educated? Are they non-educated? And now from a lot of research came that a lot of voters don't even know when they go to Spain, for example, to Benidorm, was actually a video I saw yesterday, where Benidorm is, for example. And Socrates said, who do you want to steer the ship when we go from here to there? Do you want the people to steer the ship or an educated captain to steer the ship? So the democracy, and that's what Aristotle says as well, is a not so good for governance because it will destabilize the state. Because the wrong people who are uninformed, uninterested, usually are the majority of the people, unfortunately. So when you
is that by design though, Aaron? Because is that by design more in that it suits the interests of whether you call it the elites, the ruling class, or the globalists, or whoever's in power at the top of the apex? Isn't that by design that the masses are generally, uninformed mobocracy? But if we have access to information that you're describing, then we could be part of a truly, people-orientated, system.
Yes.
Rather than it being elected into an educated captain, for example.
Yes, of course. Information is key here again. If a majority of the people are uninterested, they just want to be, as they say, not informed but entertained, and this is the rule. So that was already known by the Roman emperors, of course. They gave them the bread and the circuses. Same thing. But then, of course, a ruler, a president or a king can, of course, abuse that volumetric advantage that you would have by not educating them, by not informing them. And this is what we see all over the place. The information never comes from governments. It's selective. It's not about, you have to know that. No, it's all about, for example, at the moment, you need to be vaccinated without the information that they should know to be making a informed decision.
Yeah, so I guess I'm understanding it. People talk about breaking the matrix, and the matrix being that, we've largely been conditioned into systems that are there to, kind of deceive us, not give us access to the right information so we can then, have self-governance or autonomy in our lives, but we're instead distracted and diverted, which perpetuates these, immoral capital or systems that are, unhealthy or toxic by nature. You touched before on the evolutionary nature of the universe, because we talked about the ethical side of it, but I'm interested to know more about the evolutionary nature. Is it much like when you see fractals and they're constantly dividing and creating their own systems? Is that what you mean by evolutionary nature of information?
Well, the fractals, the iterative, repetitive formulation of reality in life, that's everything that is proven to be working is repeated and copied and so on to build structure. Of course, that is the beauty of the elegance of simplicity of nature, I think. Yeah. So we can copy that, right? That beauty is in the simplicity, and the simplicity is in truth, in reality. That's about it, how I see it. So evolution, of course, is an ethical process because it is non-harmful. It must be ethical because it's always trying to adapt, and as Charles Darwin said, what is being sought as useful is being preserved by nature. So the non-usefulness is discarded. The useful stuff is evolving, is being used. However, how can we be these beautiful organisms, you and me, people and animals and so on? Because the evolution was able to evolve towards them. Now we have this ability to reflect, as a person. Now we can reflect and say, okay, how now we can help nature to preserve our species. No, we now create bioweapons to destroy it, for example. Now that kind of thinking is contra-evolutionary, isn't it? And that is why I'm trying to write and lecture and teach that ethics, or doing the right thing, is in line with evolutionary process of the universe. So it can sustain us in balance. And the beauty of this is that you can do that very simply by using all relevant information and asking all the questions.
I think one of the things that really resonates for me is the philosophical basis of what you're saying, because for me, there's like creating value and there's creating anti-value. So value is determined by principles like, as you say, beauty, because beauty is truth. So beauty, goodness and gain, which is a flourishing, or the sustainability. And anti-value is embodied in evil, and a lack of things, and an ugliness. So it's not hard to see anti-value in the world, that we can take a beautiful place or a system or people, and we can absolutely demolish it and make it, so as you said, the use of bioweapons, or the use of any kind of weapons of destruction, is all part of that, taking something and making it destroyed. So and you very much do underpin what you're saying with reference to philosophy, because you talked about Greek philosophy specifically. Are there any other philosophical ideas that you have drawn upon in your work?
Yes, well, the first thing you referred to was Kung Fu, the series, in the 70s. I remember always it's like, remember one thing: a wise man walks with his head bowed, humble as the dust, like the dust. So that's a very important part of my life. It became my rule of life. And now I see also the work of many philosophers. For example, I just looked at this morning The Value of Philosophy. That's it's a paper by Bertrand Russell, who says that a lot of people, many people go by this idea of a materialist, mechanistic worldview. They have no view or the relationship. They cannot see the relationship with wisdom. Only they see the things as a table, as a chair, as an automobile, but they do not see the total view or vision of that. It is all actually created by the mind of man, by thinking. So they say, okay, we need to have this mechanistic, imperialistic worldview based upon the science as we have now, based upon empiricism, which you can only use your physical senses to determine what is science or non-science. This, of course, is limiting our view, because that already excludes correcting feedback or information that is beyond those empirical views. So that determinism is now false. And I'm not saying that myself. Many philosophers, many scientists admit now, because now we have this material reality. We live in the material reality that we have created, like that. But we have this complexity too, and that complexity can only be corrected, controlled, steered by real-time information. And this is the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great believer of that. I've never been a reductionist by nature in terms of scientific rationalism. I'm very much a believer of wisdom over knowledge, or actually the fusion of both, and grounding into, making something better. So things like, you do within your think tank, Sustenance for All, which is all about prosperity, not necessarily on financial materialism, but in terms of like social good and happiness, absolutely. And as a Buddhist, that really resonates with me. Maybe on a personal level, it's kind of really understanding that you're already happy. So I am happy now, as opposed to I desire to be happy, so, really that within the organism, within the system, is this absolute perfection and beauty of itself. But we're just so conditioned not to see that, we're conditioned to see ourselves as lacking on some level. You told me prior to this interview about a couple of situations you've been in when, like, during the Iraq-Iran war, for example, you were working in the oil industry on a supertanker which got hit by an exocet. And you were saved by the Iranian army and ended up going to a tugboat to safety, as, other examples of working in Africa, the Rwandan conflict, and, street riots, working amidst those, as well as, during terrorist attacks in Indonesia or Colombia, for example. So your work in terms of working in the oil and gas industry has necessitated that you very often had to be, working under protection by the military and private, security firms, etc. All of that is, those life-threatening situations. Is there something about your mindset to get through all of these things? Is there anything you can share with us in terms of your, learning and feedback loops and your understanding?
Well, perhaps I can tell you this. I didn't tell you this earlier, but when I was 25, I had a near-death experience by an anaphylactic shock. Therefore, I lost all my fear. And because I lost all my fear, I was able to work in those countries. So that is, I think, the basic cause that I am now not afraid. So when you are afraid, then of course you are limiting yourself by making the decisions based upon fear or anxiety. So I try not to be afraid. This, I think, is a big difference by living my life now and by being able to create and think 100% of my capacity, I believe, that I can use, because you do not have to be afraid, you know, and I think that is the big message. And that is not the end, I see, and I can confirm, you know, so confirm that. So fear of life makes us making the wrong decisions. We did not grow out of our basic reptilian brain capacity. So we act on fear, we act on anxiety, but there's so much more. So when you open up to that and lose your fear, then of course, then the creativity of the universe is yours.
That's absolutely beautiful, Aaron, and that's so pertinent for today. And I mean, you know, look around and we see the vast majority of people are living in fear, and it's a manufactured fear, because, you know, the threat out there isn't necessarily commensurate, you know, with the reality. But, you know, the fear is really, really pumped up through the media and other things, to actually, you know, keep people in this constant state of fight or flight or freezing, you know, trauma freezing. Certainly, you know, from my spiritual practice, you talked about your near-death experience. It's, you know, very much about really understanding the nature of life is to understand the nature of death, you know, and life and death are one. And so I think, as you say, once you transcend that fear of death, it opens up a whole world of possibility. But unfortunately, we live in societies where most people are traumatized and frozen, yeah, and haven't confronted their own mortality.
Yes, that's unfortunate, and that is, of course, again based upon the perception problem. We see the things not like they are in reality. We always exceed the limitations of reality, or the realiteit, and then always end up in entropy. But when we understand that death is not the end, and the political lunacy at the moment to ignore that death is real, and that is what causes our lives to be disturbed very much. That unacceptance of death, and they try to escape death, but nobody can escape death, because death is again also a law of physics. It's a law of nature. Death means life. So it's like a circulation of lives. And when you do the right life, the good life, this, and in the time you are now here, you know, you don't harm anybody. I do believe in karma, so you don't have to come back. So you can move on in evolutionary levels up to the nirvana and the Buddhist, how do you call it, realm of tranquility. So I think that too. So what we can do is look for everything we are makes us useful to live well, and we need not to live long, but to live well. We make a mistake to want to live until we are 150 years old, but not to live well towards that end. And this is, I think, also, and so my message would be: live well, be content, express gratitude, express happiness, rather than being anxious, being jealous, being unethical, being destructive.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and they are things of personal development, aren't they? Is to really dig deep in those things and to find that joy and find that gratitude in life. because very often society sets us up to complain and to feel like our lives aren't good, and that we should have more. But actually seeing the beauty and the connectedness and the value of what we have right now, and that even if we're going through really difficult times, to see the jewel in that, the lesson in it and what we can take. Because, facing being hit by an exocet on a super tanker wouldn't have been a good experience at all, I'm sure. But, it's like saying, well, what was the learning? What was the experience you gained from that? What lifelong, memory have you got that's a positive one from it? But this lack of connectedness to the whole or interdependence to the whole seems to be very much connected with what you're talking about produces entropy. And you say that, in your writings, that we have a very short window to turn this around before society is going to collapse, implode. And, we do have things like civil wars. I think you're talking like 2 to 5 years. So, can you share to the viewer what we could do towards ward off some of this extreme entropy?
Well, yes. I hope that, first of all, that people will watch this interview, this talk with you, to start first an awareness, about these things. And hopefully it triggers people to want to learn more and read more about it. I've been writing a blog since 7 years, and gradually I'm penetrating the minds of others very slowly. My books as well, slow. It's not like I'm a big bestseller. But I think, again, based upon the law of physics that we now talked about, that, we need to have the information to avoid that collapse, that civil war. We have the information to do so. We have the information. The only thing that collects is cooperation between all the people who observe that this is not going to go the right direction. So we need volume, 15% of the population. I hear some noise. 15% of the population, the volume must be reached by working all these alternative news media, alternative TV stations, bloggers, influencers. If they admit that something is not going right, we have to try to create them into one volumetric group. And then we have the ability to influence decision making. I think that is the goal, and that's why I thought about this idea of setting up a people's lobby, a lobby firm presenting those 15%, hopefully the 99%, to at least to have a voice in the decision that are being made without us. And I hope that people will pick this up. So it's called the Human Wellbeing Fund, that people can help us to at least sit at the table where the decisions are being made. That's how I see that we can avoid the next 2 to 5 year societal collapse. If we don't, then the societal collapse is inevitable, and that may be a good thing, as you said in the beginning, but that will be a lot of harmfulness for a long time. And I don't like to cause harm. I don't like to have people harmed, like our children, our grandchildren, to be harmed by this transition time, which is actually not necessary unless we allow all information to correct our ways towards the normal sustainable goals.
I suppose this is where, energy and frequency come together, because if we're resonating on a higher frequency as energetic beings, then it can absorb a lot of the chaos that could be there, the disorder and chaos that comes from entropy, and almost mitigates it. So that's how I see, a way of tackling that. I like what you're saying about the People's Lobby and a Human Wellbeing Fund and the volumetrics of people really collaborating and coming together. For me, it's something about being at the table, but not being tainted by being at the table, because I think that's something that happens far too often. People go in with very laudable kind of visions and aims, and then become so stagnated or disillusioned, or as I say, tainted by being at the table, that it actually changes the whole original intent. So that's to stay clear of the stagnation of that entropy is quite a task in itself, that's what you're describing as your, the transition period. I'm just wondering, on a micro level, for our listeners to really think about what they can do individually to get the most out of time and energy working in their favor, so they're not entropic, so to speak.
Yeah. So my tip for the listeners, look, I think that we have to ask all the questions. First of all, see and do your own investigation about what information is reliable and not reliable. Information, of course, we have to try to see there is this law of physics of being, there's boundaries, we call boundaries of functionality. Everything functions in nature and in our lives as well, if we keep those boundaries, within those boundaries, as we call the limitation of reality. So when we think of something that is unreal, untrue, unethical, it will not be condoned by nature. It will not be rewarded by nature. It will increase our anxiety, our the loss of control of our lives, really. So try to be honest, try to be asking all the questions, all the relative questions. Always use this idea of maximizing the number of questions all the time before you make a decision, for example. The example, for example, you go drive a car. What do you need to drive a car? It's not just a car and petrol. You need information to drive the car. When you cross the street, you cannot just look to the right alone and then forget about to look at the left side. Again, the same principle applies. With that information, we can reach safely the other side of the street. That basic principle applies to everything. I cannot make it any more simpler, So when we think about this all the time and we really make it into as our method of living, our manner of living, then we can avoid harmfulness, entropy, disorder, and we can live happy and fulfilled lives. That may be the best message I can see, because as I said, this is our universe. It's all interconnected. If I think a thought here, already that is being part of the total reality, the physical reality that there is. Information is there in my mind, but it is information. It's there. You cannot avoid it. So when we think the right thoughts, we get the right feedback back. If we have the wrong thoughts, we get the wrong feedback. So intention is everything. Intention, ethical intention, doing the right thing is everything. Information, as soon as it's thought, it becomes part of the universe. It cannot be divorced anymore. It cannot be ignored. You cannot lie about it because it's there. This is a real eye-opener, I hope, because now we can think, oh, wow, if I try to lie something, try to suppress something, and I try to enforce something that is undeserved by me, to get something that's undeserved, I will not gain, because it will never give you tranquility. It will never give you pride, because pride is only to be received when you have earned it in the right way. So pride of things, you can have a lot of money, but if you're not proud of it, how you got it, you can never be happy and you can never be satisfied with it, because you always lack something. You see it all over the place. The only thing they think then is we get more money, but at what cost? So there's two systems. There is a positive and a negative interdependent thinking. Positive interdependent systems, for example, economic systems, are beneficial for everyone. But now we have built a whole society based on negative interdependent organizations with only a few that benefit, but at the cost of people, at the cost of an environment, at the cost of lives. This cannot be sustained. So what I'm trying to offer, my thinking and my books and my research, to help people realize that if we have all the information available to do the right thing, why don't we do it?
Perfect point to end there. And it's such a simple question. So why don't we do the right thing? Because it takes an awful lot of energy to do the wrong thing and to reap all the chaos and disorder from that. So, I mean, I know that individual viewers may have lots and lots of views on that as to, you know, why the wrong thing is being done at a macro level and whose interests it serves. But to just, you know, take the ownership and to take that power back and to understand that, you know, the law of cause and effect, that, you know, everything has an energetic imprint that cannot escape the laws of physics. I mean, as a Buddhist, you're into different, you know, past, present and future, you know, you're tipping into things like, you know, a layer of consciousness. Some people call it Akashic records, but, you know, that everything's stored energetically as information, so inescapable in that way.
Right.
So I really, you know, resonate and you know, applaud what you say, that actually once we bring in conscience to it, then we can't escape what we know. And you know, most spiritual beliefs talk about that day of reckoning at the point of death, that we have to confront our acts, both good and bad, and, you know, see them for what they are. So by putting more things in the system that is productive and good, has to be a much more preferred way of living, especially because everything is so interconnected, as you say. So, Aaron, I really want to thank you for sharing your insights, your experience with us today. I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed hearing about your life and the conclusions that you've drawn based on your information, your theories of change. Just before we do that, I just want to ask you one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of hope, is it hopeful or not, the future?
Yes, good question. That's hope. Hope, they say, is like, yeah, it's almost something in the future. We always hope it gets better in the future, right? And we always are promised that, oh yes, people, we have hope. Barack Obama, hope. But we are living in the now. And I think the only hope that we have is to try to live in the now and change our lives now, not hoping for something in the future. So hope is a dream. We always have to stay dreaming, because I'm a dreamer too. But try to hope, try to use what I try to demonstrate, what I try to tell. I'm not like a reverend or a preacher or something. People think I'm something a preacher, but I just say, okay, I collected information that is useful, and please use it. So you do not have to hope, you already know you can do it.
Wonderful. Yeah. And to stay in the moment and to almost achieve the simultaneity of cause and effect in the moment is actually the being aligned in life, isn't it? To as you say, the physical, you know, the laws of physics that, you know, produces sustainability.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's why I you know, I talked about this near-death experience, and then when you have something like that, there's only the now left. That's all. There is no other. There's only now. There is no tomorrow. There's only now, and that is a mind-boggling change, of course. And I sometimes I hope everybody should have one to become more aware, to become in that level of awareness. But of course, it wasn't really a nice experience, physically. But on the other hand, there is information, there is teachers, there is people who could guide you, be full teachers in those things. So hopefully it opens people's mind to start willing to learn more, willing to read more, and that's all I can do.
Yeah, and we are conscious, living, learning beings, aren't we? Sentient beings that, you know, need learning to evolve. So yeah, I shared that hope with you about bringing that into the now more. So I want to thank you for a wonderful dialogue. I'm certainly taken a lot from it. I've learned a lot about physics, which is a good thing, and how that can be applied in everyday life. And so this podcast is on my Free Thinkers Hub platform, which is a social site where people can find out more information about you as well. So I'll post it. Is there anything briefly? I think you've got at the back there sustainable systems design. Is there a website you just want to briefly say before the end? www.sustenanceforall.com, is it?
Yes, that's correct. People can read more of the background. I describe it on the pages of the website, how I came to these conclusions. There is several videos I made on YouTube, also some interviews about these things that I had in Geneva a couple of years ago. People can watch those. And they can call me, contact me, and if they want to build a new organization or a sustainable organization that is maybe a startup, I think that is very important that we build it on the information that is available, the physical realities that I've been discussed, so they can be sustained for the long term. And also for investors for the long term, it's very important to understand these physical reality, the limits of reality or realiteit, that they have to build these things within those boundaries in order to be sustained for thousands of years, because that is according evolution and nature.
So we're going to a new age now. Some call it the age of Aquarius, which is going to be lasting for 2,160 years. So it seems like a great juncture to do something different and to learn from our dark past, perhaps, and go more into the light of self-aware consciousness and live in balance with the laws of nature and the laws of physics and the laws of justness, which is all the things we've talked about today. So thank you, Aaron. We're going to end the interview there, and just one huge thank you for giving us your time and your expertise and your lifelong wisdom here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I hope that people will learn something, have something to pick up from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.